Deception is the perfect name for this skill because it sucks and you should never waste a skill point on it. At a glance, Starfield's social skills look like a cool way to play as a silver-tongued wordsmith who's mastered the arts of persuasion, commerce, and leadership. And to a degree, you can live out that fantasy. But once you actually try to use half of these skills, you realize just how janky and impractical many of them are. Today we'll be taking a closer look at exactly how all 16 of the social skills actually function, and whether you should be investing any skill points into them. As always, my ratings are inherently subjective, but I try to look at things as objectively as possible after thoroughly testing every skill. Let me know what you do and don't agree on, and whether I've missed any more nuanced uses of these skills. It was great to hear from all of you on the physical skills in my last video. Let's dive in. First on our list is commerce. It's a pretty clear-cut skill where at rank 1 you buy things for 5% less and sell them for 10% more, with each subsequent rank increasing those amounts by 5%. If you're someone who earns the majority of your credits through selling items and you find yourself purchasing most of your ammo and supplies instead of scavenging for them, there's definitely a use case for some point investment here. If, however, you constantly complete missions and you loot every med pack and ammo crate you see, then I'd be more hesitant to dump as many points into this skill. Personally, I have 450k credits just lying around and all the ammo and med packs I'll ever need, and I've never put a single point into this skill. The biggest selling point of commerce is that it also reduces the cost of ship components, which is far and away the greatest credit sink in the game. If you're planning to build a massive custom ship, then it's going to cost a pretty penny, and this will definitely help reduce those costs. If you're someone who has an XP or credit farm outpost setup, this skill is probably useless to you since money's no issue. All things considered, there's nothing game-changing about this skill, and if you do even a reasonable amount of looting, it's very easy to finish an outing with a bulk of sellable items to cover your in-game expenses. I'd recommend maybe 1 point in commerce since it provides a 10% increase to selling items versus the 5% increments you get from all further ranks. We'll throw this into B tier across the board. As someone who enjoys cooking, I was really hoping for something exciting from Gastronomy, but unfortunately it's just a giant lunch bag letdown. Each rank of Gastronomy unlocks new recipes, with rank 4 giving you a chance to save ingredients while cooking. Sadly, none of the recipes you unlock sell for any meaningful amount of credits, and almost all temporary boosts you get from food items last around 3 to 5 minutes on average, and only a few last over 10. I don't know about you, but there's no way in hell I'm opening up my inventory to snack on something new that frequently, and I barely remember to sleep in a bed for my well-rested buff to begin with. Another unfortunate discovery I've made is that you actually can't stack any of the same buff type from food. The newest one will always overwrite the old one. For example, if I eat a Grandpa's meatloaf that boosts XP for 120 minutes, then immediately drink an XP tea that boosts for 30 minutes, that 120-minute buff gets overwritten to 30. Now knowing this, I'd actually downgrade my nutrition rank from my last tier list from an S to a B. It's still useful and would give you 33k free XP on the grind to max rank everything, but it's not nearly as good since it only works on a single XP booster. This means there's basically 0 point in upgrading the skill, as Shepherd's Pie and Grandpa's Meatloaf are XP boosting recipes that are not tied to leveling the skill, and other recipes just aren't compelling enough to justify points. I wish I had something better to say about this skill, but it's mostly a waste of skill points, unless we get some survival mode later on that adds some elements of complexity that makes this skill useful. The skill isn't 100% useless, so I'll be generous and say it's D tier, but there's much to be desired here. Persuasion, a keystone skill for anyone who really wants to maximize a speech-oriented playthrough. If you've completed a significant number of quests, you'll surely have had the option to partake in numerous persuasion instances, but have you ever really felt like it was necessary to have skill points invested in it? I'm expecting this to be an extremely controversial skill in terms of ratings, but I personally think it's not worth putting even a single point into this skill for the average player if you have no issue with saves coming or you don't get hung up over failed persuasion outcomes. In most scenarios, I almost always back up a save out of habit before a big interaction like a persuasion attempt, and if I really want to succeed, I'll just revert to the save if I fail, but honestly, I only really care if I'm intentionally trying to play out every single dialogue outcome for lore research purposes. This method obviously trivializes the need to rank up the skill, but of course, if you want to have an honest playthrough with all consequences included, and you do care about the success rate of persuasion interactions, then sure, you've got a much more valid case for putting points here. Another important thing to mention here is that sometimes a successful persuasion attempt actually ends up being the most boring outcome in a questline, so I'm often inclined to see what either failing the check actually does or not even opting for the persuasion attempt if that's possible. That said, it can just as easily help reduce the tedium of some quests upon a successful interaction, so it does kind of balance out. We're going to give this a dual rating, as persuasion's perceived value will differ immensely based on the kind of player you are. If you're like me and you save scum or you live happily with whatever the outcome of a persuasion attempt is, then you should probably never invest points here until you have nothing better to put them in, and you'd probably rank this a D tier skill. If you run a social type character and making peace or convincing others to do your bidding is the cornerstone of your playstyle, or you just really like making sure your persuasion attempts have the greatest likelihood of success, then you're probably thinking this is more of an A to S tier skill. Scavenging is another fairly subjective skill, but I think it has legs to stand on in an argument for whether it's worth putting points into. Rank 1 allows you to find more credits when searching containers, then you find more ammo at rank 2, and then more aid items at rank 3. Unless you just blast through the game without hunting around for loot, then you'll always get some value out of this skill, and I honestly think it's played a huge part in why I have so many credits and so much ammo stockpiled. Each rank is useful, but I think rank 2 is the sweet spot. I've personally never come close to running out of med packs, and it's hard to miss seeing those containers while exploring. Ammo, on the other hand, was much more painful to come by early on, and it's also very expensive to purchase compared to meds. As for rank 4 of Scavenging, I think it's one of the lamest unique rank 4 perks in my opinion. If you have a particular item tracked, it will instead highlight that item orange instead of the normal blue when you have your scanner out. This is only useful if you remember to track something in the first place, and it's pretty underwhelming as you're likely to be naturally looking at most highlighted items anyways to see if they're important while exploring. It's a very minor convenience type skill with an infrequent use case. I think generally Scavenging is a solid B tier skill that isn't game changing, but is certainly useful, especially at rank 2. The rank 4 perk, however, is definitely D tier and isn't worth dumping the skill point into. Theft is another useful but not game changing skill. Rank 1 is required for being able to pickpocket to begin with, rank 2 increases your success rate by 10%, 30% for rank 3, and then 50% for rank 4, with the added ability to pickpocket holstered weapons. As nice as getting the 5-finger discount on some weapons is, I just don't find it worth the 4 skill points of investment, and for that matter, most of the time pickpocketing isn't all too special, unless it's against a named NPC. The biggest issue, of course, is that there's a chance that when you get caught that you'll have the guards called on you and that you get your ass hauled off to jail in a city, or it causes a fight to break out in other places. Getting jailed just screws your gameplay flow, and then you have to steal your stuff back, and obviously combat can really mess things up too. However, theft is very convenient for stealing keycards off people, and that can really expedite some quest steps and give you access to areas you would normally not be able to reach. Similar to Persuasion, this is a skill that can be completely trivialized by save scumming, so again, if you have no qualms with that, then rank 1 is surely all you'll ever need. With all that considered, I'd say theft is another B tier skill that certainly has its pros, and I 100% recommend everyone puts at least the 1 point into it to unlock it, but beyond that, that's your prerogative. Personally, I'd say they're better spent elsewhere, even on something like Scavenging, which we just discussed, that's naturally built into your normal gameplay and probably rewards about the same amount of loot with none of the hassle. So I spent ages trying to test out Deception, and either this skill is just completely bugged and broken, or it's just complete dog shit. Supposedly, with each rank, you are more likely to have enemy ships surrender to piracy demands, and enemy contraband scans become less effective. For the contraband scanned aspect, I tried numerous tests of varying levels of deception and different percentages of shielded cargo filled with contraband, and there's never been a difference. And even if there was, there's no point in bothering with this skill because you can just pay around 5 to 10k credits for hundreds of kilos of shielded cargo that has over an 80% evasion rate already, or you could just go to the key and sell your contraband there where you don't even get scanned. It's useless. The piracy part of this seems to be just as bad because I could not for the life of me observe any noticeable difference when using this skill at rank 0 or rank 4. First off, there's no clear way to discern whether a ship is stronger than you or not because you can't tell what the hell your own ship's level is, and even against a dinky little level 4 ship, I couldn't always get it to surrender. Something is clearly wrong here. But it doesn't matter anyway, since piracy loot is almost always mediocre when you compare it to boarding a ship, and if you've ever tried conducting piracy in a system of friendlies, you'll find out the hard way that it's barely worth it at all. You either get jailed and have to pay off your bounty, or you just get blown to bits, or you have to kill 20 other ships and rack up a 300k bounty. I don't know what I'm missing here, but I think this skill is a complete dumpster fire. If someone here can prove me otherwise, please let me know, because I'm not convinced that this skill even works, and if it did, it would be useless anyways. Big fat F. If you enjoy in-depth, research-based Starfield content, then consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss my next analysis video on combat skills. Diplomacy is the first of 4 humanoid manipulating skills, and honestly, all of them are kind of underwhelming. Diplomacy is actually the simplest and cleanest of all of them, and all it does is just make the targeted NPC stop attacking. As you rank up diplomacy, you'll be able to influence NPCs up to 10 and then 20 levels higher than you at ranks 2 and 3 respectively. At rank 4, you can force an NPC to permanently stop attacking unless you attack it again. Normally, diplomacy only lasts for 30 seconds, which is often more than enough in small encounters, But in larger groups where you have way more enemies to deal with, it's certainly better to have rank 4. But is it worth 4 skill points? Probably not. I really think it's hard to justify. The biggest issue with this and the rest of the NPC influencing skills is the fact that you have to have your scanner out, aim at the enemy, and then actually conduct the influence check to see if it actually is successful. If you're in the middle of a giant firefight, this is a huge pain in the ass, and in most cases leaves you fully open to receive fire, and the check may not actually be successful, and then they'll still come after you. I could potentially see this being more useful on higher level difficulties against enemies that you can't normally one-shot, but realistically, anybody with a reasonably strong weapon is not going to have enough trouble taking down an enemy to make it worth having to pull your scanner out and do these checks against every NPC. An unlisted benefit that diplomacy also provides, however, is additional dialogue options during persuasion checks. These options typically are higher number value while also having a higher success rate, making them great for increasing your likelihood of success in a persuasion check. This is a nice small bonus that only requires 1 point of investment, and the fact that the skill isn't entirely useless, albeit very clunky and probably more impractical to use than just shooting your enemies, it's not bad enough to warrant an F tier ranking, but it is definitely a D tier skill in my eyes. Unless you believe you can reliably utilize this skill while in combat, I wouldn't bother putting points into this. Intimidation is our second NPC influencing skill, and instead of making NPCs stop attacking, it makes them flee. Ranks 1 to 3 are just like they were for diplomacy, but rank 4 is slightly different in that it doesn't make enemies flee for an infinite amount of time, it makes them flee for a substantial amount of time. This means 30 seconds at ranks 1 and 3, and 60 seconds at rank 4. There is actually a very specific use case for intimidation, and I do think it functions slightly better than diplomacy. Because an intimidated enemy doesn't get reset if you attack them, it's great for melee builds or builds in general that lack strong DPS, as it'll give you a 60-second window to just go to town on them. One thing that is a bummer, and this also applies to diplomacy and the other NPC influencing skills, is that you only get one chance to actually try and influence them. If it fails, you can't try one of the other methods. If it works, you only get that one shot and you can't influence them again. Intimidation also comes with the hidden perk of having additional dialogue options added to persuasion checks. Overall, I'd say Intimidation is only slightly better than Diplomacy, but because it has that additional aspect of not re-aggroing after you attack somebody who's intimidated, I'd say that this at least warrants a rank of C. Again, I wouldn't say 4 points is worth it for the skill, even though that double duration is kind of nice. Moving on to some more unique skills, we have Isolation. I think this is an awesome skill, but of course the trade-off here is that you're going to have to go it alone. If you're sick of your companions getting mad at you for doing anything remotely morally questionable, every rank of Isolation gives you 10% weapon damage, and you gain 15 damage resistance for each spacesuit and helmet equipped when you don't have a companion or crew member following you. Now, when it says damage resistance, this is specifically physical damage resistance, and you can verify this by checking the status menu on your character as you rank this skill up. But all things considered, this is absolutely nuts. This is an incredibly strong offensive and defensive buff to your character, obviously for the significant trade-off of not having a follower who can hold items for you, act as a bullet sponge and distraction from enemies, and be a supplemental damage dealer. But I think the trade-off is pretty fair, especially in areas where having a follower is inconvenient, like in more stealth-based encounters where a follower would actually be detrimental to have around. This is an amazing perk. It would have been cool if there was a unique rank 4 perk, but honestly, these pure stat boosters are some of the strongest of any individual skill, so I'll let it pass. If you're looking to go it alone, this is obviously one of the best skills in the game for you, and it's got to be an S tier skill. If you're planning to have a companion at your side, you will probably never want to put a skill point into this, and you would think that this is an F tier skill. So there really isn't much in between on this one. It's either great or it's useless. Negotiation is another fairly straightforward skill. At rank 1, you gain the ability to access bribery and speech challenges, similar to the NPC influencing skills. Ranks 2 and 3 reduce bribery cost by 25 and 50%, and rank 4 gives a chance for bribery to not cost anything at all. Putting 1 point into the skill obviously doesn't hurt, as it unlocks new opportunities to perform speech checks, but I would say putting a single point into any of the other NPC influencing skills is equally as good, and it costs no credits to utilize. Again, it's not a skill that's 100% useless, but its utility is very, very minimal. It's also joining some of the other social tree skills in D tier. Instigation is our third NPC influencing skill, and instead of making enemies run away or stop attacking, it forces enemies to attack their allies for a limited amount of time. Ranks 1 to 3 are identical to Intimidation in terms of duration of effect and the level of NPC that you can influence. However, rank 4 causes the instigated NPC to fight its enemies until it's dead. This does look like something decent on paper, as you would get another person to deal out damage and to soak up enemy fire. The only issue is that this is extremely janky, and half the time it feels like it's not working properly, especially if there are no enemies within close proximity to the instigated enemy. When this is the case, or simply the only enemy in the area, the instigated enemy will instead revert to attacking you. Therefore, I'd only recommend using this skill when enemies are really clumped up together. I wouldn't suggest ranking this up to rank 4, as the 30 seconds is often enough to either finish the firefight or have the NPC killed in the process. Similar to the other influencing skills, Instigation also provides unique dialogue options during persuasion checks. We'll also throw this one into C tier because when it actually works, it is kind of useful, but again, it's still a clunky skill to utilize. Leadership is the opposite of the isolation skill and is all focused around companion buffs. At rank 1, your companion gains affinity 25% faster, which will speed up how quickly you reach major checkpoints in a romanceable companion's questline. Rank 2 adds 50 health and 50 kilos of carrying capacity, which is quite substantial in most cases, which translates to a 10% HP buff or a little bit lower depending on your companion's level, and the 50 kilos in most cases is close to around a 40% buff to carrying capacity. Rank 3 gives your companion the ability to occasionally heal you when your health gets low, so when it gets red barred, but honestly that amount of healing is quite minuscule and it's about the amount of half of a med pack. Rank 4, however, doubles the bonuses of combat and physical skills on crew and companions have a chance to pick themselves up from a down state, so you won't have to use a med pack to pick them up. This doubling of bonuses only affects the companion itself. Their skills do not translate to buffing you directly. If we look at this example of the Adoring Fan, we know that one of their skills is weightlifting, and if you increase your leadership rank to rank 4, they gain an additional 20 kilos of carrying capacity. You'll find similar usefulness for any companion that has skills in the combat tree, such as rifle certification on Sam Coe, or particle beams on Andreja, assuming you're making them utilize those weapons as well in combat. I'd say rank 1 of leadership is more of a nice to have than anything, as nothing's really stopping you from ever maxing out all of your character affinity. Rank 2 is pretty nice, as the carrying capacity is a welcome buff. Rank 3 is kind of useless and it doesn't happen very often. And rank 4 is also very good. This isn't a game-changing skill, but the benefits it provides are fairly solid, and if you're somebody who consistently runs around with companions, then this would be a welcome skill to at least put a couple points into. I'd say this is a strong B tier skill that falls just shy of A. Alright, we're getting closer to the end of the list here, and next up we have Outpost Management. This is such a vague skill in terms of descriptions, and I really don't understand why they couldn't have just given us numbers to make it more clear what the benefits are to this skill. At rank 1, you get additional cargo links that can be placed at your outpost, and this increases the amount from 3 to 6. At rank 2, you can have additional robots constructed at your outpost, and this increases the number again from 3 to 6. At rank 3, you get additional crew that can be assigned to outposts, and what this actually does is it allows you to add 3 additional crew stations to your outpost, which increases the total potential number of crew members from 6 to 12, as each crew station provides you with 2 crew. The really dumb thing about this, however, and maybe this is a bug, or maybe I'm not utilizing the outpost system properly, is that ship command, for some reason, is the determining factor of how many people you can actually place at a given outpost at any time. Even if it says you can have 12 crew members there, it's not actually true. If anyone here has ever been able to have more than 8 people at an outpost at a given time, please let me know how you've done that. The final rank of Outpost Management doubles the rate that extractors produce resources at, and this is a pretty solid buff for anybody who's going deep into the outpost building system. Every single rank provides a legitimate buff, with rank 1 probably being the most useful if you go really complex into your outpost building, where 3 cargo links is probably not enough to get a good farm running. Rank 2 is useful, but it's not nearly as impactful as the cargo links. Rank 3 is solid, assuming you have enough crew members to actually utilize all of the extra spaces. And rank 4 is obviously great, as it's a pure doubling to your resource production, assuming you're actively utilizing all of those resources. This is a must-have if you're using outposts for XP or credit farming. I'm going to be generous here and call this an S tier skill, as each rank has a compelling enough argument for investing the point. However, I would say that this is a late game focused skill that you won't be wanting to invest points into until you're ready to commit serious time to outpost building. Manipulation is our final influence-based skill, and I have very mixed feelings about it. The purpose of the skill is to allow you to take control of NPCs and make them do your bidding. The only issue is that it seems like you can only ever input a single command for a controlled NPC to enact on. This is particularly useful for scenarios where instead of having to pickpocket a keycard, you can manipulate an NPC and make them utilize the keycard for you. You can also use manipulation as a pseudo type of diplomacy where while they're manipulated, they basically won't do anything and they'll kind of follow you around, and you can force your manipulated NPC to attack another NPC. Manipulation also provides you with additional speech interaction options, and these ones are typically the most potent and sometimes have an immediate effect on the target you're trying to manipulate. Because you can only seem to execute a single command on a manipulated enemy, this makes the rank 4 perk almost entirely useless, as any command you would give to a manipulated enemy is likely to take less than the 30 seconds that you get at any of the other ranks. It's also worth mentioning that you can only manipulate one target at a time, and if you try to manipulate somebody else, it'll overwrite the previous command. Feel free to skip the next 10 seconds if you want a pretty well inconsequential spoiler, but if you want to get a free rank of manipulation, all you have to do is progress through the Ryujin Industries questline, and you'll get a free rank of manipulation without having to invest the prerequisite amount of skill points into the tree to unlock it. Because manipulation shares most of the benefits from the other influence-based skills, and because you can utilize this for things like keycard access, I think it's worth bumping it up to a B, but just barely. The rank 4 perk, however, is very bad, and the only reason I'd put it in D instead of F is because it can act as a pseudo-diplomacy. Second last on our list is Ship Command. It's another clear-cut skill where every rank simply increases the number of active crew members you can have on a ship at a given time. For some reason, as we've already mentioned, this seems to impact Outposts as well, and I'm not sure if that's a bug, but that's how it works right now. Ranks 1 to 3 increase your amount of crew members by 1, going from 4 to 5 to 6, and then rank 4 gives you an additional 2, boosting the total up to 8. This is a pretty solid skill, assuming you have crew members that provide direct benefits to either your ship or outpost. Sarah Morgan, for example, has astrodynamics, and while it doesn't increase your grav jump length, it does actually decrease the fuel consumption for any of your jumps. So skills like that are obviously very useful, and the more that you have active on your ship, obviously the more powerful you'll be. I'd say this is a solid A tier skill, and the rank 4 perk is also solid as it gives you a +2 boost to crew members instead of the normal 1. Last on our list is Xenosociology. This is identical to the humanoid NPC influencing skills, only this time it works specifically for alien creatures. All 4 of the humanoid influencing skills are just lumped together into Xenosociology, and all have the exact same effect as what we've previously mentioned. The subtle differences here being that all the influencers have a 60% chance of success, and that every rank of Xenosociology unlocks one of those influencers. Another key difference being, of course, that aliens are not going to have keycards that you can utilize, making the manipulation aspect of it weaker, and you can't control terramorphs, sadly. Given how janky and clunky it is to actually utilize these skills, and the fact that you only get one try across any of the influence methods makes it far less desirable. Honestly, it's kind of embarrassing how lackluster 2 of the 3 master skills are in this tree. Despite the fact that you can get all 4 influence skills by investing in Xenosociology, they're for the most part watered down versions, and fighting alien creatures is not nearly as difficult as humanoids with guns. I think putting this in D tier is pretty fair, as unfortunate as that is. If you can't tell from most of my rankings in this tree, I don't find the social skills to be that compelling. A single point in commerce will never hurt. Persuasion is extremely subjective to your playstyle. Scavenging can be quite good, especially the first 2 ranks. Theft at least 1 point is also useful. All of the influence-based skills are very clunky to use, and honestly, you're probably better off just using a gun in 9 out of 10 of those scenarios. However, they do provide additional speech check options, which is a slight benefit. Isolation is an excellent skill for anybody who's sick of their companions, and the flip side of that, for those of you who do enjoy your companion's presence, is leadership, and it's pretty decent. Outpost Management is a critical skill for anybody serious about diving into that side of the game. And finally, Ship Command is an all-around solid skill. If you enjoyed this video and are looking for more, don't worry, the rest of the skill trees are on the way. If you're wondering what skills in the physical tree are worth your points, then check this video out next. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.